The first time my manager told me I was worthless, he did it with a smile. Not a big smile, not the kind that looks angry or cruel. It was the calm kind, the kind that makes you question whether what just happened was even real. I was standing in the copy room with a stack of client packets pressed against my chest, trying not to cry over a mistake that honestly should not have mattered that much. I had been at the company for 11 months, working as a junior account coordinator at a mid-sized marketing firm in Chicago. I was 28, underpaid, exhausted, and still trying to prove I deserved to be in a room full of people who all seemed louder, sharper, and more confident than me. My manager, Derek, leaned against the counter and looked at the revised presentation in my hands. Then he said very casually, "Claire, I'm going to be honest with you. You just don't have what it takes. You'll never be successful in this industry." I actually laughed at first, not because it was funny, because my brain refused to process that a person could say something that brutal so casually, in the middle of a workday, next to a humming printer and a half-empty box of stale donuts. I remember staring at him, waiting for the punchline. There wasn't one. He shrugged like he was doing me a favor, like he was some wise mentor giving tough love to a naive young woman who should be grateful for honesty. "You're too soft," he said. "Clients can sense insecurity. Leadership can sense it too. Some people just aren't built for this." Behind him, through the glass wall, I could see two of my coworkers at their desks. They were definitely close enough to hear. Neither of them looked up. That was the moment something inside me cracked. Not loudly, not dramatically. Just enough for me to realize I had spent almost a year begging for approval from someone who enjoyed watching me shrink. I wish I could tell you I said something clever. I wish I had looked him in the eye and delivered some perfect line he would remember forever. But I didn't. I just nodded. I walked back to my desk, sat down, and stared at my screen while my chest burned and my ears rang. My hands were shaking so badly I had to tuck them under my legs to keep anyone from seeing. For the next 3 hours, I answered emails, updated client notes, and fixed a scheduling issue for one of Derek's accounts, while his words kept replaying in my head. "You'll never be successful." By 6 that evening, almost everyone had left. The office lights had dimmed to that cold, bluish after-hours setting that made everything feel lonelier. I was still there. Not because I was behind on work, because I didn't trust myself to get in my car and drive home without breaking down. At 6:17 p.m., my phone buzzed. It was my mom. I ignored it. Then it buzzed again. And again. Finally, I picked up, already annoyed, already on the edge. "Mom, I'm at work." She went quiet for half a second, then said, "Claire, honey, are you okay?" That was all it took. I turned my chair toward the window, covered my mouth, and started crying so hard I couldn't even answer. She stayed on the phone with me while I tried to breathe. I told her I was just tired, that work was stressful, that it was stupid and I'd be fine tomorrow. But even as I said it, I knew I was lying. Because Derek hadn't just insulted me. He had confirmed the fear I had been quietly feeding for years, that maybe I really was ordinary. Maybe I really was too quiet, too emotional, too hesitant. Maybe the reason I was always overlooked was because everyone else saw something in me that I had been refusing to accept. When I finally left the office, it was nearly dark. Cold wind hit me the second I stepped outside, and I stood there on the sidewalk in my wool coat, clutching my bag like it was the only thing keeping me upright. That should have been the lowest point. But it wasn't. Because when I got to my car, there was an email waiting for me from Derek. Subject line: Performance follow-up. My stomach dropped before I even opened it, and the moment I read the first sentence, I realized he hadn't just humiliated me in private. He was putting something in writing, and that was when I understood this was about to get much, much worse. I sat in my car for a full minute before opening the email. The parking lot outside the office was almost empty, just a few scattered cars and the yellow glow of streetlights reflecting off the wet pavement. My hands were still shaking when I unlocked my phone. Subject: performance follow-up. The message wasn't long, but every sentence felt heavy. Derek wrote that he had ongoing concerns about my performance, that several leadership members had noticed my lack of confidence, that my role required stronger initiative, and that I was struggling to meet expectations. But the line that made my chest tighten was near the end. If improvement is not demonstrated soon, we may need to reconsider your position within the team. I read it 3 times. Not once had anyone said anything like this to me before. My last 2 quarterly reviews had been fine. Nothing spectacular, but nothing negative either. Suddenly, within a single day, my future at the company looked like it was hanging by a thread, and Derek had it in writing. I drove home that night in silence. No music, no podcasts, just the sound of the windshield wipers moving back and forth while the same sentence repeated in my mind: "You'll never be successful." The next morning, I got to the office earlier than usual. I wanted to prove him wrong, or maybe I just wanted to survive. For the next few weeks, I worked harder than I ever had in my life. I arrived before most people and left after almost everyone else. I double-checked every email. I triple-checked every client document. I volunteered for small tasks no one wanted. At first, Derek didn't say much, but slowly, things started to shift. Not in a good way. In meetings, he began questioning my ideas in front of everyone. If I suggested a timeline, he'd tilt his head and say, "Are you sure you're ready to handle something like that?" If I shared an update with the team, he'd interrupt halfway through to clarify something I had already explained. At first, I told myself I was imagining it, but then other things started happening. One afternoon, I walked into the conference room to present a small campaign update for a retail client. It was nothing major, just a 10-minute overview of social media performance. Halfway through, Derek leaned back in his chair and said, loud enough for everyone to hear, "Claire, can you slow down? You sound nervous." I froze. I hadn't been nervous. Not until that moment. A couple people shifted in their chairs. Someone coughed. No one said anything. I forced myself to keep going. But by the time I finished, my voice was shaking. After the meeting, one of the designers, Jenna, caught up with me near the coffee machine. She lowered her voice and said, "Hey, don't take Derek too seriously." I gave her a small smile. "I'm trying not to." She hesitated, then added quietly, "He does this sometimes." Something about the way she said it made my stomach twist. "Does what?" I asked. Jenna looked around the room, then leaned closer. "He picks someone." I frowned. "What do you mean?" She shrugged slightly, clearly uncomfortable. "Someone junior. Someone quieter. Then he kind of pushes them until they either toughen up or leave." I stared at her. "You're kidding." I wish I was. Before I could ask anything else, someone called her name from across the room and she walked away. But her words stuck with me the rest of the day. He picks someone. And suddenly, the past few weeks made a lot more sense. The constant criticism, the subtle digs in meetings, the performance email. It wasn't about helping me improve. It was pressure. Slow, steady pressure. About 2 months later, HR called me into a meeting. When I walked into the room, Derek was already sitting there. And the moment I saw the folder on the table, I knew exactly what was about to happen. But what Derek said next was worse than anything I expected. Because he didn't just question my work, he questioned whether I deserved to be there at all. And that was the day everything finally broke. The HR room always smelled like artificial vanilla. I noticed that the second I walked in. It was the kind of detail your brain clings to when it's trying to avoid something worse. Derek was already sitting at the table. Across from him was Melissa from HR, smiling the careful, professional smile people use when a conversation is about to go badly. There was a folder in front of them. My name was written on a sticky note attached to it. "Claire," Melissa said gently, "thanks for coming in. Please, have a seat." I sat down slowly, already feeling the tightness building in my chest. Derek didn't look at me. He was scrolling through something on his phone, like this meeting was a minor inconvenience in his day. Melissa folded her hands on the table. "We just wanted to have a quick conversation about performance expectations and make sure everyone is aligned moving forward." Aligned. That word alone made my stomach twist. She opened the folder. Inside were printed emails, project notes, and something that looked like a formal report. "Over the past couple of months," she continued, "Derek has documented several areas where improvement is needed." Documented. My mind went blank. I looked at Derek, hoping for even the smallest sign that this was exaggerated. Instead, he leaned back in his chair and said, calmly, "I've tried to mentor Claire, but I'm not seeing growth." The words hit harder than I expected. "I've stayed late almost every night," I said quietly. Melissa gave a polite nod. "And we appreciate the effort," she replied. "But effort and results aren't always the same." Derek slid a paper across the table toward me. It was a performance improvement plan. 30 days. 30 days to prove I deserved my job. My hands felt cold. "Is this really necessary?" I asked. Derek finally looked at me. The expression on his face wasn't angry. It was worse. It was bored. "Claire," he said, "this industry is competitive. Not everyone is cut out for it." The exact same tone he used in the copy room. The exact same quiet certainty. Something inside me started to crumble. Not because I believed him, but because I suddenly realized no matter what I did, this story had already been written. The next 4 weeks were brutal. Every task I touched felt like it was under a microscope. If I asked a question, it was written down. If I made a suggestion, it was noted. Derek started copying leadership on emails, correcting small things that normally would have been handled in a quick conversation. One afternoon, he even rewrote a 2-sentence client update I had sent. 2 sentences. I stopped eating lunch with the rest of the team. I stopped speaking in meetings unless someone asked me directly. I started waking up at 3 a.m. some nights, staring at the ceiling, my brain replaying every small mistake I had made during the day. By week 3, I already knew how this was going to end. And on day 27, Derek called me into his office. No HR this time. Just him. He folded his hands on the desk and said, "Claire, I don't think this environment is the right fit for you." Not fired. Not technically. But the message was clear. Resign. Leave quietly. Save everyone the trouble. My throat felt tight, but I kept my voice steady. "So you're saying I should quit?" He shrugged. "I'm saying you'd probably be happier somewhere else." Happier. The word almost made me laugh. I stood up slowly, trying to hold myself together. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then Derek said one last thing. "You're a nice person, Claire, but nice doesn't build careers." That was the final push. I left the office 10 minutes later with a cardboard box, 2 framed photos, and the quiet feeling that maybe he had been right all along. For the next few months, I avoided that entire part of the city. Avoided LinkedIn, avoided former co-workers. I told people I had decided to take some time to figure out my next step. But the truth was simpler. I felt like I had failed. Completely. What I didn't know at the time was that losing that job was about to change everything. Because 2 years later, I would walk into a glass conference room in downtown Chicago, and sitting on the other side of the table would be Derek. 2 years later, I pushed open the glass door of the conference room and froze. There he was, Derek, sitting halfway down the table with a laptop open in front of him, talking quietly with 2 other people. For a moment, I thought I had walked into the wrong room. My brain actually refused to connect the dots, because the last place I expected to see Derek again was here, at my meeting. One of the partners beside me said, "Claire, you okay?" I blinked. "Yeah," I said quickly. "Sorry." But Derek had already looked up, and when our eyes met, something strange happened. He didn't recognize me. At least, not right away. Which, honestly, was almost funny. 2 years earlier, he had spent months dissecting my weaknesses, documenting my mistakes, and explaining why I would never succeed in the industry. And now he was staring at me like I was just another executive walking into a meeting. "Everyone," the partner beside me said, "this is Claire Bennett, our strategy director." Strategy director. The title still felt surreal sometimes. 2 years earlier, I had left Derek's office carrying a cardboard box. 3 months after that, I had taken a junior role at a small startup marketing firm. The kind of place that didn't have fancy offices or glass conference rooms. Just a small team of people who moved fast and cared more about ideas than hierarchy. At first, I was terrified. But something unexpected happened when I no longer had Derek's voice in my head every day. I started speaking up. I started suggesting things. I started realizing that maybe the problem had never been my ability. Maybe it had been the environment. Within a year, I had moved into strategy. Within 18 months, I was leading client accounts. And earlier that year, when our company expanded after landing several national brands, I was promoted again. Which is how I ended up walking into that room, across from Derek. One of the people on his team started the introductions. "Derek Collins," he said, gesturing toward him, "Senior Account Manager at Northbridge Marketing." Northbridge, a large agency, one that had recently been struggling. I knew that because our firm had been approached to consult on a restructuring project, which meant Derek's team wasn't here to evaluate us. They were here because they needed help. Derek stood up slowly, and now I could see it clearly. Recognition. His eyes narrowed slightly as he looked at me again. Then something shifted in his expression. Not anger, not embarrassment, just surprise. "Claire?" he said. The room went quiet for half a second. I gave a polite smile. "Hi, Derek." One of the partners beside me looked between us. "Oh, you two know each other?" Derek hesitated. Then he gave a small laugh. "Yeah, we used to work together." Used to work together. That was one way to describe it. The meeting started. For the next 40 minutes, I walked the room through our strategic proposal, market positioning, operational restructuring, client retention strategy. I spoke calmly, confidently, answering questions from multiple executives across the table. And the entire time, I could feel Derek watching me. Not interrupting, not correcting, just watching. At one point, one of the directors asked a question about campaign development timelines. Before anyone else could answer, Derek spoke. "Well," he said slowly, glancing at me, "Claire probably has the best perspective on that." The room turned toward me. 2 years ago, that moment would have destroyed me. But this time, I simply nodded and answered. Clear, direct, professional. The meeting wrapped up shortly after. People began packing up laptops and exchanging business cards. As everyone started leaving the room, Derek stayed behind. I gathered my notes and slid them into my folder. Then I felt him step closer. "Claire," he said quietly. I looked up. For the first time since I had known him, he didn't look confident. He looked uncomfortable. "I didn't realize," he began. Then he stopped. He glanced toward the door where the rest of the group had already left. And then he said something I never expected to hear. "I think I might owe you an apology." And that was the moment I had been imagining for 2 years. But the truth was, what I said next surprised both of us. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. Derek stood there with his hands loosely in his pockets, shifting his weight like someone who wasn't used to feeling uncertain. 2 years earlier, he had been the most confident person in every room. Now, he looked like he wasn't sure where to stand. "I think I might owe you an apology," he repeated. The strange part was, I had imagined this moment 100 different ways. Late at night, in the shower, during long drives. In every version of the fantasy, Derek finally realized he was wrong, and I delivered some perfectly sharp line that made him regret everything he had ever said to me. But standing there in that quiet conference room, something felt different. I studied his face for a second. He looked older, more tired, less certain. "What for?" I asked calmly. He exhaled slowly. "For the way things ended," he said. "Back then." That was the closest he had come to admitting it. Back then. Like it had been some minor misunderstanding instead of months of pressure and humiliation. I leaned back slightly against the table. "You told me I would never be successful," I said. He nodded once. "Yeah," he admitted. "I did." There was a pause. Then he rubbed the back of his neck and looked toward the glass wall of the conference room. "I was hard on people," he said. "I thought that was how you pushed them to grow." I didn't respond, because I already knew that wasn't the truth. You don't push someone to grow by convincing them they're worthless. You do it because it makes you feel powerful. But I didn't say that out loud. Instead, I just said, "It worked out." He gave a small, awkward laugh. Clearly. Another silence settled between us. Then, Derek said something I hadn't expected. "Northbridge hasn't been doing great," he admitted. "A lot of restructuring. A lot of people leaving." That explained a lot. The tension in the meeting. The reason their team was suddenly looking for outside consulting. He looked back at me. "I guess you proved me wrong." There it was. The line I had imagined hearing for 2 years. And weirdly, it didn't feel like victory. It felt quiet, calm, like closing a door. I shrugged slightly. "I didn't prove anything," I said. "I just went somewhere that let me do the work." Derek nodded slowly, and for the first time, he didn't seem like he had a response ready. He stuck out his hand. "Still," he said, "I'm sorry." I looked at his hand for a second. 2 years earlier, I would have needed that apology. I would have needed him to acknowledge everything he did. But somewhere between that cardboard box and the office I worked in now, something had changed. I didn't need his approval anymore. I shook his hand politely. "Take care, Derek," I said. Then I picked up my folder and walked out of the conference room. As I stepped into the hallway, I could hear my team down the corridor talking about the proposal and next steps with the client. My client, not Derek's. I walked toward them, heels echoing softly on the floor. And as I joined the conversation, one thought crossed my mind that made me smile. 2 years ago, Derek had been absolutely certain about my future. Turns out, he had just been looking at the wrong version of my story.